Hey guys, welcome back to Huddle and JavaScript for Minecraft Bedrock. In today's video, it is part 4 of the series, and we're going to be talking about dynamic properties in today's video. Now, I do have an example code for you guys to run that has two code examples for dot and exclamation point. So yeah, you guys can go ahead and get that script down in the description below. And essentially what this does, it will save dynamic properties to the player or to the world, allowing you to lock down the world whenever a certain player is online, or constantly when the world has got that lockdown saved to it, which kicks everybody out of the world except for players who have the staff tag. The only reason why I'm giving you this code, is so you have a proof of concept on how to integrate dynamic properties into your code instead of just having the examples that are going to be in this video, because dynamic properties can be confusing, and I do understand that, guys, and they do take a lot to learn. So if you need to rewatch this video a few times, or if you need to get more explanations, then you can feel free to join my Discord. It is in the description of my channel, and I'll also put it in the description down below in this video. And you can join my channel and either ping me or the boss or anyone in there who has the code tag to help you guys get more explanations on dynamic properties. And you can also get general code help over there. But with all that said, guys, let's get into today's video. So let's open up Visual Studio Code and let's get started. So guys, here we are inside of Visual Studio Code. Now, this is basically what we're going to be going over. It doesn't look like a lot, and to be honest, it isn't, but dynamic properties, there is a lot to explain about these and how they work. So it is going to be quite a lengthy video, guys, because I'm going to try and go in depth as much as I can. Now, you guys can see I've got notes on screen. These notes will also be inside of the downloaded file inside my GitHub that's down in the description below. But if you guys want to see even more notes, that's where this comes in right here. And this is the lockdown script you guys can download once again on my GitHub. This is just a way of showing you how to put dynamic properties into code and how you can use them. It's kind of like a massive example of working code. Now, everything is documented in here. As you guys can see, all of the comments that we have. And if you guys want to learn about event handlers, if statements, switch case arguments, and everything like that, you guys can just go and check out my other videos on my channel, because today we're just going to be focusing on dynamic properties. So there are 4 different dynamic property types that you guys can save, and that is the world, it is entities, it is player, and it is items. So you guys can save dynamic properties to items such as a stick. You guys can save it to a player. You guys can save it to an entity like a sheep, for example. And you guys can save dynamic properties to the world. Now, depending on where you save it, it depends on how you're going to be accessing it. So every single dynamic property saved to the player and the world and all that are completely different, and we use them for different things. So for example, if we want to save things to the world, that means that we can always access it, we can always change the data and check the data. If we set it to the player, we can only access, set it, and change the data when that player is online. So if the player goes offline, we will not be able to access that data anymore. If we have it on an entity, the entity has to be rendered in. So if we have an entity down and then go to the other side of the map where it's completely unloaded, it's not in loaded chunks, then we won't be able to access the dynamic property again because the entity has been unloaded. And that's the same thing if we was to drop a stick on the ground and then leave the area, and the stick gets unloaded, it won't be able to see the dynamic properties, change them and alter them, so we won't be able to access them. But if the stick or the entity dies, So if the stick gets thrown inside of lava, or if the creeper entity that you've set some dynamic properties on dies, you guys will not be able to get them dynamic properties back, because those dynamic properties will then delete themselves automatically because the entity has been deleted, whether it's an item or whether it's a entity like a creeper or a sheep. So I hope that makes sense, and that is the 4 different types of things that we can set dynamic properties to. And the world dynamic property and the player dynamic property is what we're going to be focusing heavily on in this video. So just to recap what the player and the world dynamic properties are. The world dynamic property can be accessed all the time, 24/7. Doesn't matter if nobody's in the world or if one person's in the world. The code can always access the world dynamic property, but the player can only be accessed when that certain player is online. So if I save something to Bob and then save something to Jesus, Jesus will leave the game and I won't be able to access Jesus's dynamic properties, but because Bob is still online, I can still access Bob's dynamic properties. So for an example, stats. You only need to save things to players and only need to see their stats if they're online. So you can save stats to that player, for example. So let's get into 3 different set dynamic properties that you guys can do. And this is being able to set numbers, booleans, and string. So here we've got player.set dynamic property, and then we've got sub, and then we've got 20. Now we're saving a number here, which is kind of obvious, but what does this basically mean? So what we're doing is we're typing player, which is the player class, then we're doing dot, and then we're getting set dynamic property, and that's going to create a brand new dynamic property or set an existing one that we already have. In this case, it will be creating a brand new dynamic property called sub. Now this here is your key, so basically the name of your dynamic property. So in this case, I've called it sub, and then we're saving a number to it, so we are putting 20. And then if you wanted to save something to the world, you would simply put world.set dynamic property, and then you would put key or whatever you guys want. We call it a key, but basically it is the name of your dynamic property. So for example, I could put Google here, and then I could put 20. But you guys do need to remember what you've set your key as, because that's the only way you're going to be able to access that dynamic property later on if you want to change it, delete it, or anything like that, if you want to modify it and things like that. So do remember the name of your dynamic property, or in this case, remember the key. Now you can also do booleans. So we've got player.set dynamic property, the exact same thing as we've got up here, but this time we are putting our name in, and then we are either putting true or false. Now, numbers and booleans do not require quotation marks around them. So you can either put any type of number here on the number one. You can put minus numbers as well. And you can put a number as long as you guys want. But for booleans, you can only use true or false. And then you can do the same thing for the world. Again, we've got hello, and then we've got false. And then we've got the string. Now, again, everything's the same, but this time when we do player.set dynamic property, we're putting in the key, which is the name of our dynamic property, and then we are putting quotation marks again. And inside these quotation marks, you guys can put any text base thing that you guys want. So you can put emojis, you can put any type of word, letter, number. But if we do type true in here and then type 50, this is not going to get seen as a boolean, and this is not going to get seen as a number. It's just going to get seen as text, and the reason for that is because it's in quotation marks. So whatever I put inside of here, it will get seen as a string and nothing else. And that's the exact same thing that works for the world as well. So world.set dynamic property, and then we've got the key, and then we've got our string. So moving on to player.set dynamic property, and we've got the name of the dynamic property, and then we've got null. Now, this is what it does. It deletes it. It's pretty self-explanatory, but it's not completely deleting it. This is simply just taking the value that we have saved in that dynamic property. For example, we've got player.set dynamic property sub. So this is going to go to our number one up here because we have sub right here and we've set it to 20. So currently, up until line 10, sub has the number 20 saved in it. But as soon as it hits line 14, or if we run this inside some code, say we want to clear 20 from it, if we do player.set dynamic property sub to null, that is going to completely get rid of the number 20 that's been saved, and it's putting it as null, and null means undefined or nothing in scripting. So we're basically saying get rid of it, replace it with nothing. And that's the exact same way of doing it for the world. So world.set dynamic property key, and we've got null. And again up here we've got world.set dynamic property key, and then 20. And then down here we're setting it from, we're getting the name of it, and we're setting it to null. And that is how you guys can delete dynamic properties. Now let's talk about how you guys can change objects and arrays into string. We're going to be using an object here, for example. So we've got player.set dynamic property, and we've got our name of the dynamic property called human. But instead of putting here now our string or our boolean or our number, for example, we have typed json.stringify because we are trying to save a object or an array. And if you guys want to know about more, more about objects and arrays, please let me know down in the comments, and I will do a full video on it in the next part of my series. But for example, all we're doing is if we hover over json.stringify, we can see it says it's changing the JavaScript values to basically into a JSON format, which is a JavaScript object notation. So basically all it's doing is it's taking the object value that we have down here, which is player true, user, name, player name, UUID, and player ID, and it's taking this information and it's putting it into a string type format for the game to be able to read. But we don't want to leave things inside of a json.stringify format, because if we need to change this and use it later on in the code, we do need to put it in for a json.parse, which is down here, but we'll talk about that when we get to it. But basically all this is doing is it's saying json.stringify, and then we're saying is player. So this is just one thing that you guys can do inside of here. So we're checking is it player. As you guys can see, is player requires a boolean type. So is player true or is player false? In this case, is player true, and we've set it to true. And then we've got user here, and that requires a name and a UUID. So you guys can see it's got user, then it's got name, and it's got UUID for this property. So we've put name down, we've set player.name, and then we've got the UUID, and we've done player.id. So what this is doing, it's storing the user's information, and it's getting the name of the user, which is player.name, and it's getting the UUID of the user, which is their player ID, and it's json.stringifying it so we can read it. So once you guys have done that, you guys can do a console.warn. So this says it gets a stringified version of the object, making it readable to see the data inside of it. So it will basically say the data for this, which will be SIW Solus and my UUID number, and it will say that it is true. So it's going to make it a stringified version. Again, we talked about strings up here. So basically it turns the object that would be a bunch of pretty much gibberish up here, and it will basically change that into a stringified version that says hey there, for example. So you guys can put this inside of the script and do console.warn, and then we've got open bracket player.get dynamic property. So this is how we get dynamic properties now, guys, and how we can read them. So we type get dynamic property. If this was on the world, so if this was the key, we would put world.get dynamic properties. And then obviously we would put key to get the one that's set up here, for example, which is world.setDynamicProperty key 20. So that's how you can get the world and how you can get the player dynamic property to read it. But sometimes if it does throw an error at you guys, you will need to JSON.stringify objects. So things that aren't objects, things that are just strings, booleans, and numbers, you guys can just simply do this without the stringify. But if you're trying to save an object, you guys will need to JSON.stringify it just like that. And then when we want to edit it later on in the code, we're going to JSON.parse it. But first of all, let me just show you guys here. We've got player.setDynamicProperty, YouTube, and then hey there. And like I said before, the reason why this is different to this is because this one, we're just saving a string value. So we're doing console, we're saving just a string value, as you guys can see. So to show this, if it's just a string value, all you have to do is do the exact same thing, console.warn player.getDynamicProperty YouTube, and that should respond with hey there. You guys can copy and paste this if you want and check it out. Then now we've JSON.stringified things, so we've turned an object into a stringified version. We now need to JSON.parse it, and if we hover over it, as you guys can see, it says that it is the complete opposite. It converts JavaScript values to and from the JavaScript from the JavaScript object notation format. So if we hover over parse, we can see exactly what that does, and it says it converts a JSON object notation JSON string into an object. So basically all that's doing is it's getting the stringified version of this object and it's turning it back into an object. So instead of it being just normal raw data, JSON.parse will put it back into the object. Now, it says changing the stringified object back to an object so we can use it later on in our code when we try to read the value of it. Now, we can look at this question mark here and these curly brackets here, and I'll be going into them in just a second. But to JSON.parse something, what we want to do is we want to put JSON.parse, and then we open some brackets and do player.getDynamicProperty, and then we're going to put our name here of the dynamic property. In this case, we are going to be displaying the key. Then we've got two question marks, and then we've got this right here, which is it is a empty object. So if we go down here, it says we use the default operator question mark to provide a default value if it throws errors. So if it runs into an error while it passes the dynamic property, instead of it throwing an error, it will use the default value. So this will basically just return the stringified value of the code without parsing it. Because if it can't parse it for some reason, maybe it ran into an error when it was parsing it, or maybe that value isn't available to parse, instead of it just running, throwing an error at you, it will just use the stringified version and give you that. But it also says here, the default value is just a stringified version of the object/array without it being parsed. So it will just show you an empty array, an empty object, just like that. And to get dynamic property IDs, so everything either in the world or on the entity or on the player, if we want to see every single dynamic property that has been saved to that player so far. So for example, our player currently has sub 20, like true, and not hey there. So if we was to run this on our player, which currently it's being run on the world, but if we was to run that on the certain player that it's been saved to, it will then show everything that I've just listed off. It will show sub 20, it will show like true, and it will say not hey there. But if we check all of the ones that are on the world, then that will show everything that has been saved to the world so far. Then we've got world.clear dynamic properties, and you can also type player here as well to clear all of the player's dynamic properties. And that is how you guys can delete dynamic properties off of a player or off of a certain entity without having to destroy the entity. And obviously, if you guys want to clear dynamic properties off of players, you guys can do this. Or if you just want to set it to null, but keep the dynamic property, but just set it to no value, you guys can just use null. But this is to completely clear it, delete it, 100% delete it. But there is also another way to delete your dynamic properties on your world. So dynamic properties do save to your UUID inside of your manifest. So if we go to our manifest, all your dynamic properties are being saved to this UUID. If I was to change this UUID from 86 to 87, or if I was to put a completely brand new UUID in here, everything that I have saved previously in the world on the players and entities, all of their dynamic properties will be reset because for some reason dynamic properties save to the UUID that is on the pack. So just make sure if you are updating your UUID constantly, just know every single time that you update your UUID, you're also going to be deleting every single dynamic property in the game. Now, if you guys want me to do a tutorial on how to update your pack without having to update the UUID and being able to put it onto realms, then do let me know down in the comments below, and I can always do a video on that. But let's just have a little recap because this video is more than 20 minutes long. So just to give you guys a quick recap on everything that we've talked about and what you guys do need to remember. It says, here's what you need to remember. Items. So dynamic properties can only be lost if the item is destroyed. If the item is put inside of a chest, or if it's being held or dropped onto the ground, then it will keep its dynamic properties. But if the dynamic property has been, if the item that has dynamic properties has been thrown into lava, for example, or on the side of a cactus, or it's been despawned, it will be deleted. All of the dynamic properties linked to it will be deleted. If the item is out of render distance, the dynamic properties don't get deleted on the item, but they won't be retrievable until that item is back inside of render distance. And that is the same, what we're talking about here for items, that is the same for entities as well. So if entities die, not players though, players are completely fine. Players will not lose their dynamic properties if they die. But entities, if you create a custom entity or if you have a creeper, if that dies or if it's out of render distance, you won't be able to use the set or the get dynamic property because it will not work because that entity is basically non-existent. The game, if it's out of render or if it's dead, it will just be deleted. All of the dynamic properties on it will be deleted. But once again, guys, I want to stress this because a lot of people get confused. If you just leave the area and that part of the world gets unloaded, don't think that that entity is going to lose all of its dynamic properties. The second you go back into that area and the entity has been reloaded, you can now access all of the dynamic properties that you saved on that entity. But if it despawns, it dies, or say an item, for example, goes into a cactus or lava, you will lose all of the dynamic properties that are on that entity or item. Now we've got players. So players, so it says player dynamic properties can only be accessed if the player is online. And that makes sense because if the player has left the game and you're trying to retrieve that player's information, it can't because that player is basically out of render. That player is not online. It's just like how entities work. If that player is out of render distance, you won't be able to get the dynamic property. But players are always in render because when you are playing, you are rendering yourself in because the world around you is being rendered. So when that player is online, that player is always being rendered. So therefore, you can always access that player's data. And if the player goes offline, that's the same as if the player was just out of render distance. So you won't be able to retrieve any data on that player. Now let's talk about the world dynamic property. So world dynamic properties are always accessible, but they can only be deleted via code. So dynamic properties that are saved to the world, if you want to delete them, you either need to use this right here, which is setting the dynamic property to null, or if you want to clear all of them, then you guys can just clear every single dynamic property on the world. But yeah, and then again, this just tells you that you can change the UUID in your pack to delete and get a complete fresh start of all of the UUIDs on that world. So just change the UUID in your pack. Make sure it is only the top one right here. But yeah, if you guys just change this, you guys will delete every single dynamic property or reset it. You'll reset every single dynamic property that has ever been used or saved on your world, or your items or players or entities. It completely removes every single thing about dynamic properties and gives you a clean slate. But you guys, that was a lengthy video. I hope I have helped you guys understand dynamic properties a little bit more. And if you guys want to learn about how to integrate them into code, you can clearly have a look at how we do this with this code here. So here we're doing a lot of JSON.parse. We're setting dynamic properties. And we're also JSON.stringifying them. So JSON.parse, and then we've got JSON.stringify somewhere in here. There it is, JSON.stringify. And we're also using it down here as well somewhere. Yeah, JSON.parse and JSON.stringify, JSON.stringify. So yeah, this is how we're using dynamic properties inside of code. So inside of code, this is what your dynamic properties will look like, instead of just this right here. This won't do anything, guys, because this is not under an event listener, it's not under an event handler or anything like that. It hasn't even got the required imports for the world up here anyway. But yeah, guys, thank you guys so much for watching. Don't forget to like the video if it did help you guys out. And if you want a more in-depth tutorial on objects and arrays, which is completely separate from dynamic properties, do let me know down in the comments below. And join my Discord if you guys need help with dynamic properties, or if you feel like I didn't explain this well enough, please do give me feedback down in the comments below. And I'll catch you guys in the next video. It's B-Boy Soulless. Peace.